القدس, Jerusalem, one of those cities that seem greater than the people who live in them. It dwarfs and overshadows its inhabitants. For millions of people who have never seen it, it is a symbol, a miraculous preservation of history. Because of this, it is easy to forget that it is a living city. It has its inhabitants, Jerusalemites. These are some of the people who called Arab Jerusalem their home before June the 5th. This is how Al-Quds was, 15 days before the Israelis attacked and captured the city. Later sections of this film, showing Jerusalem after the war, were taken under Israeli occupation. They were smuggled out. The stone wall that now surrounds the city dates back to the 16th century, to the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. But there are many much older walls. The oldest settlers in the area of Jerusalem were the Canaanites, who lived here in caves 5,000 years ago. Eventually, a Jebusite king called Melchizedek built his city and called it Yabus, later Ur-Salam, the city of peace. But the city was to know no peace. The Jews attacked the city and built the temple in the 10th century BC. They in turn suffered invasions by the Assyrians, Babylonians, Hellenes, Romans, and Persians. In 60 AD, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and banished the Jews. Jerusalem was a Byzantine Christian city when the Muslim caliph Umar bin al-Khattab entered it in 636 AD. The story says he entered it on foot, his servant riding a camel. He was perhaps the only one of Jerusalem's conquerors who destroyed nothing. Since then, from the year 636 until 1967, excepting 100 years of Christian Frankish rule, Jerusalem has been Arab and Muslim. Since the beginning of the Christian era, Jerusalem has been longer in the possession of Muslim Arabs than of any other group. They called their city Al-Quds, the Holy One. This is the Dome of the Rock, one of the 3 holiest places in Islam. It was from the rock that the Prophet Muhammad made his ascent to heaven in the famous episode of the Mahraj, celebrated all over the Muslim world on the 27th of the month of Rajab. Each Friday of the year, Christian pilgrims of different churches walk along the Via Dolorosa, remembering the sufferings of Christ on his way to the crucifixion.
As we move on from the second fall of our Lord, let us recall a second time that he was on the mountain, this time for his Sermon on the Mount in the Beatitudes, in which he prays to the poor and the weak, and said it is they who shall be blessed. Let us ask him to make of our weakness his strength.
Wenn es schon mit frühen heute so geht, was wird dann mit den Türen geschehen? Unnütz ist all euer Weinen über mich, willst du sagen. Unnütz wird selbst sein Weiden. Jesus Christus siegt.
Palm Sunday is a joyous time in Jerusalem. Processions coming down from the Mount of Olives commemorate the entry of Christ into the city, riding a donkey. In the courtyard of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, an Armenian bishop anoints the feet of his clergy as Christ washed those of his disciples. All around the old city, devoted to pilgrims and tourists, a modern city sprung up. After the war of 1948, the Arab sector of Jerusalem was swollen with 40,000 refugees from occupied Palestine. Gradually, they re-established themselves. In spite of the closeness of the enemy, of frequent shooting incidents, the Jerusalemites went on building homes, schools, hospitals, hotels. Looking out over the old city is Jerusalem's newest and grandest hotel, the Intercontinental Hotel, built on the Mount of Olives. Then, in May 1967, newspaper headlines began to speak of crisis. There was anxiety, uncertainty, a sense of helplessness. No one was ready for war.
Thank you very much.
Then, suddenly, on the morning of June the 5th, it started. Later, when people crept out into the shattered streets, they found their homes, their schools, hospitals, hotels, lying in piles of rubble. They saw signs in Hebrew. They realized they were now under foreign occupation. Jerusalem was no longer their city. When resistance had begun, houses of people suspected of helping the commandos were blown up. At the end of April, the Israelis announced their plans to hold a victory parade in Jerusalem. Women of Jerusalem turned out in protest. On the anniversary of the 5th of June, a general strike was called in Jerusalem and throughout occupied territory. The day after the strike, Jerusalemites paid homage to those who died in the war. Their lives now are lived in darkness. They wait. This is not the end.